All right, so again, everybody, the topic we're talking about today is understanding the Hebrew culture, and we have Brother Divine Prospect, Ron Shields, on with us today. I'm very excited for this topic. Again, this is just all these are just to basically edify and bring new knowledge and new wisdom to those new to the faith or those who are curious as to what it is we believe, what it is we uphold as far as the Hebraic culture. Um, just getting the understanding on it, and how it applies to our growth, right? As we continue to grow on this walk, right? So again, understanding the Hebrew culture with Divine Prospect, and so Divine, like I said, I do have a lot of people that are new to the word or new to the truth in a sense. So I just want you to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick so that people know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So peace and shalom, family. My name is Brother Divine Prospect. I'm the founder and overseer of Kingdom Harbinger Ministries, and pretty much is a ministry organization that's designed to reconstruct and restore ancient pre-Israelite culture, and using the elements from that to build a solid community with common ethics, morals, and precedences in order to enact change within the community, with the ultimate goal towards autonomy, or to become self-sustaining, self-governing, and becoming self-sustaining, self-governing, we can become Kodesh, or set apart. And as Yah will judge the nations, we will be untouched, because we will not be tethered to society in the orthodox fashion. We will be able to rely upon each other for the resources that we need to survive, and we'll be able to wait it out until we are redeemed. So that's the main goal. We like to do a lot of proactivism in the community. So what we do is that we use our Israelite culture to springboard ourselves into various areas of society in order to enact change, to bring the light of Yah there and make a difference, right? With the express intent of aggregating resources and bringing it back to our own community. You know what I'm saying? So in the process of doing that, we out here serving our people, serving the community, and also bringing that element of scholarship to the Israelite community. Bringing the think tank element, where we can socially engineer the community to go into a particular path, so that way we can be all united and on one accord, and we can respond appropriately when other people decide to come up against what it is that we stand on, right? So I've been started this ministry in 2014. Beginning of 2014, I guess I came into the awakening in about 2013, and then I fully embraced it in 2014. So the ministry has been going strong for about 6.5 years. Since coming into the community, I've interfaced with other communities, conscious communities. I mean, if that's the term you want to use, whether it be the woke Black church that has an army of urban apologists now, or it's the Kemetic community, or it's the unorthodox Muslim community by way of Nation of Islam, or it's just the RBG community, what I'm saying, that doesn't deal with any of that. West traditional African spiritual system community, those who delve in Ifa and Voodoo and things along those lines, and there's a variety of other communities. And what I realized when I came into this community, I told y'all, once he woke me up to it, what is missing, right? What are we lacking in the community? And the two major things that he revealed to me is, number one, we're not doing any proactivism in the community, and number two, there's not a lot of apologetics in our community, right? So I said, okay, if it's not there, I can make an attempt to do what I need to do and fill that gap. So that way we've covered all angles, right? And everybody has their own particular role. Prior to me coming into the truth, I've been in Christianity since 2008. So I was 5 years in Christianity when I was in the transition period. During that transition period, I looked at all those other groups that I had mentioned earlier to try and figure out, which path I should go. And Yah guided me to where I'm at today. And I've been doing this for 6.5 years since. So faith-wise, I guess you can say 11 years, almost, 11, 12 years. And truth-wise, or the awakening-wise, about 6.5 years. So here I am now.
That 6.5 years, that was included in the 11 years, or it was separate?
Yeah, so I was a Christian in 2008. So from 2008 to 2013. So I had a mission. I had a ministry when I was in Christianity. It's called Perfecting Holiness Ministries, and pretty much what it was a ministry of helps. So I was in maybe about 3 different churches during that 5-year period, and in those churches, I became a minister, youth minister in those churches, and then I was leading worship a few times. Did Bible study curriculums, Sunday school, evangelism, and then I preached on different holidays like holy convocations and different events. And then on the side, I had my own ministry where I would go to other churches and help them with their Bible study curriculums and their Sunday school curriculums and teach and assist with teaching. So that's what I was doing when I was a Christian. And then, we had a transition period because a friend of mine, she kind of challenged me to some things, and that opened up the door for me to examine other things that were out there. And this is the path that I chose, or that chose me, however you want to look at it. And this is where I'm at right now. So yeah, about 12 years with both Christianity and then the transition period, and then, identifying as an Israelite.
Yeah, it's funny how you said that you was like checking out the other cultures, because that's as you know, my testimony. That's basically what I went through. I was actually in Kemet for like a year.
Yeah, I seen the pictures, man.
Yeah, embracing the culture. I was actually debating Hebrews too, not like these two, but calling them up and different things of that nature. So it's funny to now be on the opposite side.
That's crazy.
But
when I was a Christian, I was debating Israelites. I was debating cults, like Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism, and then I was debating Muslims and all of that when I was a Christian. Because I was a Christian apologist as well. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of funny, the irony, and the humor of the Most High. You know what I'm saying?
It's like you switch roles. So
it's like one big joke. He's like, "Watch, I'm gonna have the last laugh," right?
So it's okay. So starting from Christianity, like what brought you to the Hebrew culture?
Yeah. So I would say in 2012 is when I officially preached my last sermon. 2013 is when I relocated to Atlanta from New York City. And in 2012, I had a situation where I had a family member staying with me and somebody else staying with me in their house. And it was a lot of responsibility, so I could not be as active as I wanted to in ministry. So I kind of took a break from ministry. And a female associate of mine, me and her have been cool for a long time. And, she was like rocking with me in the Christianity thing, but she was not like heavy into it like I was, but she was rocking with it. And then after a while, it's like, it just started to not make any sense to her. And I think because what she was doing is, instead of like reading the scriptures, she was actually like studying like the church fathers and going into like Christian philosophy and stuff like that. And that stuff just didn't compute well with her, you know what I'm saying, and then correlate with her spirit. So she kind of stepped away from that and started watching other material, interestingly stuff in the conscious community. And this was in 2012, and she kind of like put me onto it. And as a Christian, I was like, nah, that stuff is demonic, and that stuff has nothing to do with the gospel of salvation. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't need to be delving into that. And she's like, look, I understand you feel that way. She said, but I can't do the Christianity thing no more. This rocks well better with my spirit. And I was like, and I really liked this person. Like me and her were really cool, you know what I'm saying? And we had a really strong affinity. And I was really concerned with her soul, you know what I'm saying? So she challenged me to read some stuff. And I said, okay, cool. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to find some way to give her the gospel back. Like, I need to restore her soul. Like, she's like drifting, you know what I mean? And then after a while, I started reading a lot of information she gave me. And started waking me up. Now, as a Christian, I was kind of woke, right? So there were some things in Christianity that I knew that, so a lot of your common Christians or your laity would not be aware of, right? So, I was studying like conspiracy theories and stuff like that. So that kind of like made me aware of certain things. But then, when she was getting into like the conscious community, RBG, Black Power type thing, I just saw that as being wicked. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is wicked. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I just said, okay, I challenged myself to go look into it and see if there was any validity to it. Number one, maybe I can learn something, or at the very least, get her to reconsider being a Christian.
Yeah.
And during that journey, it was about a year with that journey with her. Me and her correlating, speaking, and everything like that. And reading material that she would share with me, and then I would research and get back to her and share something with her. Then after a while, I looked and I saw something was like different. I was like, I don't know if Christianity sits well with me anymore, but I could not like deviate away from the scriptures for some reason. Like I was still tied to the scriptures, but I didn't understand why, if I was learning all of this stuff about Christianity, that was like wow, like stuff I didn't know before, like I was blinded to it before. So then after a while, I said, okay, let me look into this conscious stuff that she's talking about. So I started looking into the Moorish paradigm, Nation of Islam paradigm, Kemetic paradigm, traditional African spiritual paradigm, RBG paradigm, and the Israelite paradigm.
Yeah.
And previously in New York, Israelites is all over the place, right? So I always bump into them. I had like debates with them sometimes. Crazy. Some of them is my friends now.
Yeah.
So then after a while, I was like, after spending almost a year, some change looking into everything, I was like, wow, for some reason I can't let go of the scriptures, but this Israelite thing is like, it's like really calling me to it. I'm like, man, that sounds solid, but I seen like a lot of, faultiness in it. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like weak and shallow. And I was like, man, there has to be more depth to it. You know what I'm saying? So I prayed to the Most High, and I told the Most High to reveal certain things to me, to give me wisdom on it, and that's what He gave me. And from there, I was like, okay, well, this looks like the path I'm gonna be on. Let me rock with it 100%, and let me find out what's missing, like I mentioned earlier, and I fill those gaps in, and over time, I just walked into it. But when I initially came into the truth, my goal, since I was conscious as well, was trying to find a balance, or trying to find a point of a common denominator, you know what I'm saying, between the conscious community and Hebrew Israelites or Israelites. And I first came into the community attempting to do that for some time, and then I met Sonetta at a barbecue, the IHBK barbecue, and from there he was like impressed or whatever. He said, man, you gotta come on my show. I said, all right, cool, I'll do it, you know what I'm saying? So I came on the show a couple times, and then I did a full-on lecture. And then from there, things started to take off even further. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then I just started building up my platform from there, and finding out the mission that the Most High had for me. I tried to run away from it several times. Even past couple of years, I tried to run away from it because I never asked to do it, and sometimes I don't feel worthy enough to do it. But I mean, I just, just gotta, like Paul says, beat his body, you know what I'm saying? Like beat yourself into submission, or put yourself into submission and yield to the Ruach, you know what I'm saying? And I've been doing that as much as I can, you know what I'm saying? So that's how I got to where I'm at right now, man. And I'm just grateful for the Most High for it. And I thank everybody else for acknowledging what He has placed in me, and allowing it to also help build them along their journey.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely put in a lot of work in the community. I mean, I've been following you for years actually. So okay, so coming into the Hebrew culture, right? How would you define the culture?
Wow. So
as short as you can make it.
yeah. Because that's like deep, right? So I'll try to simplify it. So when you say the culture, what I'm going to do is look on a microcosmic level, right? And what I will say is those in the diaspora here in the Americas, right? Because that's what I'm most intimately involved in. So to define this culture, I mean, pretty much, African Americans that were here had a history going back from the mid 1800s on, having this feeling that they are Israelites. You know what I'm saying? You have F.S. Cherry, who came about, who proclaimed this. People called him crazy, whatever the case may be. You had, several other people after him, and then you got into the 1900s where you had, other pillars in the community that came about, Josiah Ford and others, who also awoke into this identity. And the Ethiopian church in Harlem Ethiopian Jewish church in Harlem was really had the influence on African Americans to look into this notion that they could be, bloodline Israelites. And it was a really rocky road, you know what I'm saying? Because, those early individuals that identified themselves as Black Jews had a difficult time being recognized by other Jewish groups, right? But then what that started to do was cause them to formulate their own little circle, right, within the overarching Jewish quote unquote community, and pretty much try to identify who they are in the general scheme of things, right, and how they are connected aside from hearsay, aside from speculation, to being Israelites. And the awakening that we have here is different than other melanated Israelites around the world, because there's your environment shapes a lot of things around you. And me, I grew up in New York, and Harlem was where a lot of this stuff started. You know what I'm saying? And then you had your places in Chicago as well, which is really strong with the Israelite movement. Because then you had the rise of Ben Amin, who took a group of people from Chicago to Liberia, and from Liberia brought them to Israel. You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying so the common denominator between all of these groups that started to emerge, was that they were subscribing to the notion that they were bloodline Israelites by way of West Africa and the Ma'afa, or the transatlantic slave trade experience. And this journey of identifying as the people of the book became a very arduous journey. It's an uphill battle, and they were facing a lot of naysayers, a lot of people that were saying, no, that's not true, that's false.
Yeah.
And it required them to kind of push along the realms of scholarship and look for any sources to validate that. You know what I'm saying? And it's been a struggle ever since. We don't really have a dynamic presence in the realm of academia yet, but we're getting there. You know what I'm saying? We've had people that made attempts to do that. There's an organization called the International Society for the Study of African Jewry, ISSAJ. And pretty much this organization, what they're attempting to do was formulated by an individual named Edith Bruder. She was kind of like the head of it, and the objective of it was to bring about the world's ethnologists, archaeologists, anthropologists, sociologists, people who delve in linguistics, and so forth, and religion and so forth, and look into this notion that African jewelry is authentic. All these groups popping up in Africa saying that they're Jews or whatnot, to investigate those claims and see the authenticity in those claims. So I decided to join that organization, consume all the material that's been put forth in the conferences and the abstracts from the website, and followed everybody that has written papers in that organization, and create one myself. So I drafted up a paper myself to present in regards to our experience here and the authenticity behind it, by getting them to reorient the qualifications of what an Israelite is. And that is the difficulty, trying to reorient people to see that the time capsule of Israelite culture made its way to West Africa and was disseminated amongst the peoples there. And when that time capsule bursted open, the result of it was that information coming over to the Americas and being lost over time due to enculturation. So acculturation, cultural diffusion, and culturation, right? So acculturation is when you have two different ethnic groups that live in close proximity to each other, and cultural diffusion happens. So an example of that is that if in New York City, let's say there's a Little China in New York City, right? Or let's say that there's an area where the Jamaicans live, right? So after a while, you're going to see situations where Jamaicans will probably go get Chinese food, right? That's not their native food. That's not their ancestral food, but they'll be eating Chinese food. Then you see Chinese kids start listening to hip hop and start rapping. You know what I'm saying? Like that, or listening to reggae. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not part of their culture. But what happens is cultural fusion happens because they live in close proximity to each other, that over time they start to adopt certain customs or certain foods and certain practices from each other, but they're still able to maintain their their autonomy as a different ethnic group. Well, after enculturation happens for so long, after a lengthy period of time, you have enculturation. What tends to happen is now you have these people that are intermingling or marrying in with each other, moving in the same housing complexes as each other. And now you have a situation where over hundreds of years, the lines become blended where you can't tell where something originated from. And we're talking about when this thing happens without modern technology, right? Where you have groups of people that are living in close proximity, cultural diffusion happens, and then acculturation happens where you have hundreds of years down the line, new generations that are coming up in a society where the lines have been blended, right? Where you don't know who's who, and then you have, a heritage from both sides or both ethnic groups or whatever the case may be. So when Israelites migrated into West Africa, there was a few groups that were autonomous, and there was a lot of them that actually intermingled with the locals that were there. You know what I'm saying? And when that occurred, now the insemination of this Israelite bloodline, happens into these peoples in West Africa, and then these people in West Africa then get brought over here to the Americas. Then you also have your influx of those from the Sephardim, the black Sephardim that came from the Iberian Peninsula, who was expelled and shipped and sent over to the west coast of Africa as well. And then you have the intermingling there as well. So there was a lot of intermingling that occurred and that went on, where they just disseminated this Israelite bloodline into those peoples that then happened to get brought over to the Americas, right? Understanding this does not, or you should not understanding this, take away from any other ethnic group, right? The objective is to understand who you are. And once you understand who you are, what your mission, your assignment, your purpose is. So when Yeshua was speaking to the peoples, he was talking like, hey, I got another, flock that I got to bring into this fold, the lost sheep, those who are asleep. And then you have Ezekiel talking about the valley of the dry bones, and that those are the people that's going to be awoken in the later times, right?
Yeah.
So this is who we are today. We're waking up in these latter times after 400 years of oppression here in the Americas and suppression of knowledge and information. And now we're coming to the awareness of who we are, you know what I'm saying, as of late. And I'm saying this is a phenomenon that is barely 100 and something years old. You know what I'm saying? So it's much newer than Christianity. Christianity has a history that's about 1,700 years old, maybe longer than about 1,900 years old. You know what I'm saying? Depending upon where you started at. Orthodox Christianity. So that's who we are today. Who we are is we're Africans in the diaspora that identify as Israelites, because we have we're proving that we have an ethnic lineage back to the ancient Israelites, and with that trying to find our place in the world, right? Because again, this is a niche that didn't exist over 100 years ago. You know what I'm saying? So it takes time to flesh things out. Then it takes time to work on creating institutions that can teach things, and having our own autonomous community where we rely upon each other like other ethnic groups do, and be able to enjoy in some of the blessings, right, that we see in Deuteronomy 28, as opposed to holding on to the consequences of not following the statute, laws, and commandments. And so that awakening began back in the 1800s, you know what I'm saying, right during the Reconstruction period. And there was a couple other people as well. It wasn't just him. It was about 4 other people who came about and was speaking about this. And then it transitioned into, you have your early 1900s, where you have this influx of immigrants from Ethiopia coming over here through to America by way of Ellis Island in New York City, and a lot of them living in Harlem and setting up their synagogues in Harlem. And those synagogues then inspired African Americans to entreat on what this is, and in doing so, discovering this notion that they too also have a bloodline lineage back to ancient Israel. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it took on many forms over the years, and different groups came about. But where we're at today is trying to understand everything, not just from a cultural perspective, but also from a historical perspective, a linguistic perspective, and various other means on trying to reestablish our place as being Israelites here on the earth. You know what I mean? So.
Got you. All right. So before we actually go into what's consistent within the Hebrew culture, I just want to read the definition of culture real quick, just so everybody, so we're on the same page. So the definition here that I got is a set of patterns of human activity within a community or social group, and the symbolic structures that give significance to such activities. Customs, laws, dress codes, archaeological styles, social standards, religious beliefs, and traditions are all examples of cultural elements. Right, so that's the definition of culture.
Correct.
So that way now as we go into it, everyone has a definition of what it is. So what is consisted within the Hebrew culture, and is it something that we can still practice today?
Yeah. So I'll give another definition as well to complement what you gave.
Okay.
And this is from Merriam-Webster dictionary, right? You can also do the Oxford dictionary as well, which is pretty similar, or the etymology of the word culture. And it's the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social groups, right? It says the characteristic features of everyday existence shared by people in a place or time. The set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an institution or organization. The set of values, conventions, or social practices associated with a particular field, activity, or societal characteristic. All right, and the integrated pattern of human knowledge, belief, and behavior that depends upon the capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. That's the one I like right there.
Yeah.
So you have a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that was formulated at some period of time. And then, as we go on to the other part, it's integrated into the pattern of human knowledge, belief, and behavior that depends upon the capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. So that was formulated, this set of customs and ideals and norms and do's and don't do's and taboos and things that are probably that occurs through trial and error. And ancient groups attribute this knowledge to a deity of some sort, right? And in regards to ancient Israel, they attribute it to a deity that people call Yod He Wav He, right? People have different pronunciations for the deity, but Yod He Wav He is the deity that we're all referring to that goes back to Elul, right? And that deity had chose out a patriarchal individual by the name of Abram and changed his name to Abraham. And given that information to him, he passed it on down to his son, who we call Isaac, and then his son, who was Jacob, aka Israel, and then Israel's sons, who then migrated into Misraim or Egypt. So, so that deity covenant with Abram, who then passed that covenant down to his son, and then his grandson. His grandson had offspring that then migrated into Misraim or Egypt or Kemet. And then from there, the nation was born out of Egypt. And then when they left out of Egypt, the deity separated them from the things that were familiar in order to reestablish the covenant and give them a theocratic means of establishing the covenant in the land that he was taking them, right? So trial and error happened for 40 years while they were in the what's called the wilderness wandering, right? But Midbar. And then from there, they made their way into Israel or Israel in the land of Canaan and established their nation of Israel in that land. And then again, trial and error, all the way into the establishment of the Melech or the king. And the king had the authority to enforce this theocracy on the people in order to unify them. The first attempt was made by Shaul or Paul. Saul, and then followed from there was David or David, who really subdued the nations around Israel, who ushered in righteousness and fully established the monarchic rule of Torah in the land. And then at that point, the Torah itself became the norm in the everyday lives of the people. But it took some time from Abraham to David for things to evolve, things to, change from here to there in order for it to be cemented into the people's everyday customs, right? Because prior to that, it was given to them by Moshe, but the people never carried him out the way that Yah intended until he rose up a king who, by virtue of his authority on the earth, he was able to, imbue it upon the people. You know what I'm saying? So that same culture during that period of time of Dawi, when it was established during this period of time, um, is what we should seek to reconstruct and restore without the traditional lenses that we've been given to view it in, right? So my main thing in regards to this ministry, KHM, is to encourage people to get back to the culture. Now, I say things sometimes that may seem controversial, but they're really not. And the reason why they seem controversial is because people have not looked into every crack and crevice to fully establish their culture. You know, what I encourage people to do is look into every crack and crevice, because unfortunately some of the things that I present to the community is nothing new per se. It may have my angle on it, but it's just areas that we as a community haven't ventured in yet, because we're a novelty. You know what I'm saying? We haven't been here that long, right? So it requires a lot of think tank engineering in order for us to look at everything as a whole and be able to certify our culture. Because one main thing that I say to people is that, your culture dictates your spirituality. And people may not understand that. Some people may get offended by that. But it's true. Your culture dictates your spirituality. And what I tell people is that I always encourage them to go back and learn the historical culture of the pre-exilic Israelites, right? So the scriptures is the main foundation, and that is complemented when you look at archaeology, right? Archaeology is what's called the material culture, the physical elements of the culture, the concrete elements of the culture. And then you have your non-material culture, which would be your literature, right? Which has a lot of the abstract ideas and maybe some of the concrete histories of the people. And being able to look at this thing as a holistic unit and be able to, sprout from there and grow from that information to actually branch out and actually form your culture that is unique to you as a community here, right? We should not be borrowing anything from anybody else. We have a unique history. We have a unique experience. So what we put forth in the public should be unique. It should be set apart. It should be different. And we should have all bases covered as much as possible. And some examples of what I say is that to go back and look at the culture, because what we've been taught in Christianity is that we're Gentiles. And as Gentiles, you look at the text much differently, right? You tend to compare with other Gentile texts. You have to cleave unto Yeshua as the only means of heritage that you have in the Bible. And then utilize the teachings of Paul to kind of link yourself back into other characters in the text, going all the way back to Adam. So that way you can have some validation in the eyes of the deity of this book. You know what I'm saying? And what I tell people is like, well, we got to start from Bereshit and move our way to Malachi. And then once you get a foundation here.
Real quick, remember we got some new people, so these terms, you gotta like do the little parentheses and say what it actually is.
You can stop me at any time. Stop me at any time if something I say.
Bereshit is Genesis, just
yeah. So Bereshit is Hebrew for Genesis, and Malachi is Hebrew for Malachi, right? And that's the totality of the Tanakh. And the Tanakh itself is Torah, which is what's called the Chumash, which means five books of Moshe, who we attributed to Moshe. And then you have the Nevi'im. Nevi or Nebi means prophet, the prophets. And then you have the Ketubim, which means writings. And that would consist of everything outside of the prophets and the Torah, right? And that's the Tanakh, which we will call the Old Testament, right? And I don't like saying Old Testament because that's a term that was created by an entity that doesn't have the same heritage as us, right? Yeah. So I try to stay away from terms that are generically Christian or Orthodox Christian. Not saying that Christianity is wrong, right? Because if you subscribe to Yeshua, then you could be considered a Christian by certain Orthodox Christians. But what I'm saying is the way that we approach the text is going to be much different because we're looking at it from a cultural standpoint. So some examples of that. Because I teach about this stuff a million times, so I'm trying to find the best example of a cultural element. So a cultural element would be this, right? And this is the way, even for people who are Israelites, who are just transitioning to be in Israel, or if you're Christian and you're not sure what this thing is, um, you have to learn the culture of that group, those Israelites. One good way of doing that is to study the topography, the geology, the climate, the agricultural, the zoology, and all these other things of the region, because all of these things influence the Israelites' culture. So, various sciences I look into to validate what we're reading in the text so I can understand how they lived, right? Because when you understand how they live historically, then you would know what to extract from that to see what applies today and what will yield you results, right? And a lot of times when you don't get any progress, it's because things are being misapplied due to the wrong interpretation in the text. I'll give you one example of that, something that is prominent in the Israelite community. Two things. One thing is where we read in Deuteronomy or Devarim, and I'll bring it up real quick. It's okay for us to talk about scriptures too, right?
Yeah.
That's a silly question. Like, yeah, brother, you know that. Yeah. So there is a scripture. Let me bring it up real quick. Devarim is where we get Deuteronomy from, and Debar means word. Devarim is the masculine plural for words, right? Masculine plural noun for words, and pretty much it's a repetition or rephrasing of what we get in the first four books, right? Most notably, three books: Vayikra, which is Leviticus; Bamidbar, which is Numbers, and Shemot, which is Exodus. And this one particular verse here is Devarim 20:25, where it says, "A woman must not wear men's clothing, and a man must not wear women's clothing, for whoever does these things is detestable to Yod-Heh-Wafe, Eloheka, or your power," right, or your God. And the reason why studying culture is important is because a lot of times in our contemporary mindset, we think that that means that, okay, well, women should wear a dress, men should not wear dresses because women wear dresses, right? But when you go back and you study history, men did not wear pants in Israel. That didn't come about to the Persian period, where it became common in the Middle East for pants to be worn, especially those who were riding horses. But men did not wear pants. Now, we'll see a part in the scriptures where it says breeches, and say, yeah, that means pants. That doesn't mean pants. Those are undergarments that are worn to secure the private parts of the priest. Because if it's, I don't want to be too explicit, but if it's not secured, that's considered unholy, right? So that's why they have to wear these breeches that are designed to be garment to hold on. It's almost like, wearing boxer briefs today, right? That would be the equivalent to it. And if you're thinking that they had pants or jeans like we had now, then that's not true, right? So the question is, well, how do you interpret this text, right? Well, when you go back to the Hebrew, you see the word there for man, right? There's a word in Hebrew for man is ish, and there's another word that's gibar. So the word that's used there is either you use the words like gibor or gibar, and these words mean a mighty man. Typically, it's representative of a warrior, or if you go into the book of Numbers, when Moshe was separating the people, and he says that anybody 20 years and over will be the ones that will be counted to be the foot soldiers, or the ones that can go out to war. That's really when you refer to a Gibard, or somebody that is prime and ready to go to war, right? So the text here says a woman must not wear a Gabar, a man of a warrior, mighty man's clothing. So we're not talking about Ish's clothing or a regular man's clothing, but a mighty man or a warrior's clothing, and a man does not wear woman's clothing. Those that pertain to a woman. These things are detestable. Now, why are they detestable? Because pretty much what was happening during that time was that there were certain men who, well, let's do the women first. If the woman wore her garment like a man, a mighty man for war, then she actually has to fight if there's a war or battle going on. And men did not allow their women to do that, right? Because they have to rear up the next generation in their absence if they die in battle. So a woman was not to do that because it was not meant as far as a cultural norm for a woman to go to war, to go to battle, right? Now, did some women go to war, fight, whatever? You will see a few instances here and there, but that wasn't the norm, the cultural norm. But what was happening also on the flip side is that there will be some men who will be drafted for war, and then let's say that they fight and they retreat, and the enemy is chasing them into their camp, and they don't want to die. They will dress up like a woman, so they will not be identified by the enemy, and they will not be killed by the enemy. So are you following me?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So I say that to say that this is why understanding the culture is important, and you learn it going to the language, right? Learning biblical Hebrew or classical Hebrew, and then also going into the archaeology and seeing what's there in the material culture and looking at other sister cultures. So this is why you have to study the culture, looking at reading the text, but learning the events that happen in history, learning the culture of that society, learning about sister cultures, right? So the closest linguistic cognate language to Hebrew in antiquity would be Ugaritic, because they both classify as West Semitic languages, right? And Ugaritic is important because a lot of glosses, linguistic glosses that are found in the Hebrew text can be resolved by going into the Ugaritic. Now, what is a gloss? Well, a gloss is something simple. It's very simple, right? That you really don't notice unless you look for it, right? Unless you know about it. And an example of that would be the word book, right? So in our modern day time, we would think of a book as, pages with, hardcover, with soft pages inside that is bounded, along the spine and, tied to go brought together in some place where you can flip through the pages. Well, books didn't exist during the Iron Age period. Okay, books did not exist, and books really didn't come into effect. Codices didn't really come into effect until the emergence of the Christian era. Okay, so if you're calling something a book and you're reading the text, that is a linguistic gloss, because you're glossing over the concrete meaning of the word with a more contemporary word that makes it make sense to you as the reader, right? But they had scrolls, so the word sefer or sefer, we would see that as translated as book, but that's incorrect. It should be scroll, right? Or some form of parchment or vellum or whatever the case it may be that they were writing on, right? So linguistic glosses can be uncovered by looking at sister languages to Hebrew, and you can better discover what certain words mean. And we see that in the book of Psalms a lot as well. Motifs that are found in the text as well could be understood within its historical and cultural background when you're able to compare those motifs in Hebrew with motifs from other ancient Near Eastern cultures. Another thing that I'll say in regards to understanding culture, to make sure to know what's important, is in order for Israelites to properly interpret the Torah, for those of you, that's the first 5 books of Moses, where the statute, laws, and commandments are in, you also got to study sister cultures as well. One of the reasons why I brought up Ugaritic is because in the Ugaritic epics, the one in particular would be the Baal cycle. You'll see that there is a situation where Baal was one of the deities, one of the sons of El, who was vying for the throne in El's absence, but had to fight for it, right? So he had to fight Mut, death, and he had to fight Yam, which represented the sea god. You know what I'm saying? And Mut represented the god of the underworld, right? In Hebrew, Yam means sea and Mut means death, but it's also personified as a deity in ancient Ugaritic. Well, the reason why you got to understand that is because there's one passage in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 27. You could bring it up on the screen too, because I don't know what's going on my share screen. Leviticus 19:27.
All these translations.
Well, and another thing about translations as well, is that you have formal equivalency translations and dynamic equivalency translations. So a formal equivalency translation is an approach that translators take to translate from the original manuscripts or original language, because we don't have the original manuscripts, but we have manuscripts, which would be either your Hebrew or Aramaic for the Old Testament or your Greek for the New Testament. And their translation approach is, okay, we're going to do a word-for-word translation, right? So we're going to try to translate the text as much as possible word for word. And your King James Version is a slavish translation or a formal equivalency where they try to translate word for word. Now, one of the downfalls of a word for word translation, and again, you have extremes and you have moderates, right? An extreme issue with that would be if there's an idiom or a cultural expression and you translate it word for word, it's going to make it extremely difficult for the receiver of the translated language to understand what is meant in the original language. An example in English, if I was translating a book in English and I was translating word for word from English to Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, and I use the term, finger licking good, talking about KFC, or if I say Sally kicked the bucket or something like that, if you translate those things word for word, they're not going to understand what that means. Or if something in New York, if I say, yo, that joint is tight, right? Now, that's a slang, right? But if you translate it word for word, they're going to be like, what? They're not going to know what that means, right? And then sometimes that's where dynamic equivalency translations come in handy. And a dynamic equivalency translation would be like your NIV. Some people don't like NIV, but your NLTs and, other Bibles like that, is that they translate it thought for thought. So they examine a passage and say, okay, we're going to try to be as true as we can word for word, but there's going to be instances where it's just not going to work for the receiver of the translation. So what we're going to do is try to find out the best way to put it from the thought form from this language to the similar, equivalent, congruent, correlating thought form in this language. So if I say Sally kicked the bucket in English and was translated into Chinese, I would find a idiom in Chinese that refers to somebody dying. And then I would use that in place of Sally kicks the bucket instead of directly translating Sally kick the bucket.
Okay? That's actually something I learned recently too.
You say again?
So that's actually something I learned recently.
Yeah.
And the different things like that.
I learned all of this because I do a lot of study in textual criticism. I look up into transmissions of text, translations of text. I read translator notes. I read prefaces of Bibles. I like critical edition Bible. So critical edition Bible would be like the ESV, which is like the one I go to the most. I'm not going to say it's the best translation, but it's the one that I see slightly more accuracy than the other translations. But in a critical edition Bible, you'll have footnotes, right? And then you'll see them show up. Like if you go to the ESV real quick.
Okay.
And again, all this has to do with culture, because if you don't get below the surface, then your entire perspective of the text is going to be Christian based. When I say Christian, I'm talking about Orthodox Christianity that does not subscribe to an Israelite identity. Okay. So if you go down slowly. Let me see if they have the footnotes. It should have the footnotes here. Stop right there. Whoop. Go back up.
All
right. So right there, slow down. So if you see verse 16, there you go. You see where it says, shall not stand up against life, and you have your A. So the A would be your first footnote. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, go up, and it says Leviticus 19:16, and Hebrew is the word blood. So the word life and blood can be interchanged. Dam in Hebrew means blood, and life can be nefesh, which is soul, right? Or life can be translated from ruach, meaning spirit, right? But what it's showing you there is several things. So it can either give you a correlation to another scripture, or it can give you the literal translation of a word that should be there, but the reason why they don't add it is because either it doesn't represent the original word, or it'll be misleading if you read it as an English reader, right? And then they'll give you things that will be called textual variants. So you may find in a a critical edition Bible like the ESV. And the reason why it's called critical is because of these footnotes, right? And what they do sometimes is you may have a reading in English that's there because it's derived from a particular manuscript. So let's say if this is the Old Testament, let's say it's derived from the Masoretic text. So the Masoretic text come from the Masoretes, and the Masoretes were the ones that preserved the Tiberian vocalization that we find in the text that we read today. So there was many, vocalization systems that exist, but the one that's preserved via way of your little diacritic marks, that tradition is preserved by the Masoretes, and then that transmission is found later on in what's called the Aleppo and Leningrad codices, right, or these manuscripts, and they represent what's called the majority text. And the majority text is just the ones that is in greater circulation, right? But then we also have what's called the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? And your Dead Sea Scrolls is a separate transmission tradition from the Masoretic text. So in a critical edition Bible, what you'll see is that you have what's called textual variant. So let's say, for example, I don't know, I'm gonna make this up, right? Let's just say in Leviticus, no matter of fact, let me not make it up. Let me give you something that's accurate. If you go to Deuteronomy chapter 32, you don't have to turn there, verses 8 and 9, where it talks about that the people, and the boundaries was named according to the sons of Israel. Well, you'll see other textual variants in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Masoretic text, and the Septuagint, where you have the word Israel, the word El, and the word or the equivalent to Elohim. And what you do in textual criticism is you put Israel, El, Elohim, and you do what's called in the deductive analysis, where your objective is to find the common denominator between these three variants. And then you'll see that they all three have the word El in it. So you will propose that El is the original reading, and then as the transmission made its way into different sects, they added Israel or Elohim or El, right, at some point in time because of their, I would say, their doctrinal disposition, right, that has developed over time. And that is why looking at textual variants is important, because in a critical edition Bible, the footnotes will have these details and this information. And you'll see even more prevalent in the New Testament, right? Mark chapter 16 after verse 9 is not in the earliest manuscripts, which will be your Alexandrian text type family. And these are manuscripts of the Bible, which are the earliest family of manuscripts that were found in Alexandria in Egypt, right? And you'll have certain portions of the text that is not found there, such as Mark chapter 16, verses 9 and on. And then other places as well, like your John chapter 7, last verse going into chapter 8 and the first few verses about the woman caught in adultery. Just like your First John chapter 5, verse 7, which is not found also in earlier manuscripts. And a critical edition Bible will have a footnote to let you know that either it won't have it at all, or it'll put it there and then give you a footnote to say, look, this is missing in earlier manuscripts. Right. So this is also helping people get to understand these things and not just quote unquote, gloss over it, because they have meaning in trying to derive the understanding of the text. And this is how you get back to the culture. So in Leviticus 19 in verse 27, you can go to it now. I think you have it up there, where it says, you shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard. Right. So I'm going to bring that up in Hebrew. Unfortunately, I can't bring it up on my screen, but if you go, well, you don't have it. If you go to Blue Letter Bible, I don't know if you want to type it up or not. That's up to you. But if you go to Blue Letter Bible, you'll see it there in Hebrew. And the reason why I'm going to say it in Hebrew real quick and I'm going to translate it is because I want people to see why just doing even word study is important and comparing what you read here to other sister cultures, because it gives more understanding. So one of the things that the Most High said to Israel is, do not imitate the customs of the people around you, right? Do not imitate the customs of the peoples around you, right? So when Israel was coming into the land, it was coming into Canaan, there were other people that were there in Canaan, right? And Devarim, or Deuteronomy 18 and 9 says, when you enter the land, Yah, your power is given you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there, When you come into the land that Yah, your power, is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. Well, in order for me to know what not to follow, I have to know what it is. So we have a lot of Israelites that try to interpret or exegete Leviticus 19 and 27 or do a form of, midrash on it. And what they simply do is they use their contemporary understanding, reading the English text and saying, oh, this means this or this means that. So they look at me and say, yo, Divine, man, how you get a shape up? You know what I'm saying? How you get in the shape up, Divine? You know what I'm saying? Like, well, there's nothing wrong with getting in the shape up. Yeah, you got in the shape up. Why are you getting in the shape up, man? And Leviticus 19:27 is against that. Unfortunately, it's not against that. It says, Lo tachkipu pe'at rosekhem velo tashit et pe'at ze kaneka, right? So, two things that are there. That word tashit, where it says, you shall not disfigure, right? It's your second person, which is you, masculine singular. It's in the Heathfield stem, which when you learn Hebrew, you understand what the Heathfield stem is, right? Your Heathfield stem would be your causative stem, right? And the imperfect tense, right? Imperfect means that it's an ongoing action. It started at some point and it keeps going. A perfect tense means it's a past tense action, right? So you should not cause disfigurements of the sides or the edges of your beard, right? And then it says you should not shave. That word takipu, you should not shave. That's what we get, the edges of your beard. Now, you have one that's in the plural, and you have one that's there in the second person singular, meaning you, and plural mean, y'all, you all, because you can also be plural or you can be singular in English, right? The reason why I'm bringing this up is because when you get into the language further and you understand what's going on, you have to be able to look at a sister culture to discover what that means. So that word there is nakaf. So nakaf is what you would get like for shave. It can literally mean like to strike off something, or it can mean to mutilate something, right? Keep that in mind. And then your word there for your tashit, your root word would be shachaf, and that means to ruin something, right? To corrupt something, to destroy something, right? So when it's saying things like this, in order for me to properly interpret what to do, I would have to know the customs of the peoples in the land, so I know that what I'm doing is in opposition of what they were doing and that I'm not doing what they're doing. Well, sometimes in the text, you're not given that information. But if you go into the Ugaritic text, which is the best preservation of Canaanite culture that we have, aside from archaeology, you'll see that in that Ugaritic text, there's the Baal cycle epic, or the epic of Baal. And what happens is Baal is killed by Mut, right? And he is brought to the underworld. And then word goes back to El about his death. And El performs a ritual. And it's through these myths. Myths are created to justify rituals or customs of a people. So if you go to any people that's here today and there's something that they do, a lot of times they'll connect that to an ancient custom or a legend or something along those lines, right? So what the people would do is they would, when somebody died and they would mourn for them, they would literally shave off their hairs on their face, which we'll see is referenced in the Ugaritic text by way of the Epic of Baal. And then what they would do is they would cut themselves from ear to ear. And the purpose of that cutting is to disfigure their face to prevent their beard from growing back as a sign of severe mourning. Okay? So when I'm getting a shape up, I'm not shaving off the hair on my face, and I'm not disfiguring, striking off, or corrupting my face so that my beard does not grow back. So it's when you get into the language and you get into sister culture that you can marry that information to better exegete what the text is actually saying, what the author intended for his audience during that cultural and historical period of time, right? So these are just some examples. There's tons of these, right? But there's some resources that you guys can get that will help you to get to this point. That's why I say the things that we do as a community, there should be some distinctions in how we interpret the text that should set us apart than what we see other so-called Jewish communities do, or even Messianic Judaistic communities, right? So the couple of books that I'm going to give you is, one, you would need a lexicon. So what is a lexicon? Well, a lexicon, what it does is that it gives you the entries in the original language. In this case, it will be Hebrew. And then they would give you the meaning, its semantic value, which is its meaning, and what it means in that language. So you can, the best one you can get right now, you can probably get it for free online. You could buy it. It's called the Hebrew and Aramaic Lexicon of the Old Testament, the Halot, Halot. You can get free ones online, such as the Brown Driver Briggs Lexicon, which is, it's an oldie but goodie, right? You have the Gesenius, which is another real old one, but certain websites like Blue Letter Bible, BibleHub.com, they have a lot of these, lexicons there for you to use, right? Yeah. Or you can purchase the Logos, which is a software application, and you can purchase them and have them in digital form that works in alignment with the application, or the Sword Bible, eSword, or etc. Yeah. And then once you get that, the other two books that I would recommend is the Cultural Backgrounds Study Bible by Zondervan. Right now, again, I can't pull up my screen.
That was the cultural.
It's called the Cultural Background Study Bible.
Okay.
Right. My favorite version is the NKJV version, New King James Version. Okay. But you want to get that because that is a dynamic text that helps you to get through a lot of the English into the actual cultural meaning. Okay, now that very same verse that I told you about, what I did was I shared that entry, because I have the study Bible. I shared that entry in the Bible with a couple of people that was looking into that verse and wanted understanding, because I said to them, look, you got to understand what was being done in Canaan and have some kind of source from Canaan during that period of time when the Israelites would have been in the land, to understand what they were doing. And once you know what they were doing, how to interpret what Yah told you what to do and what not to do based on what you know, what is being done. That's extremely relevant. So the Cultural Background Study Bible helps you to get into the culture. Now, this was put together by Christians, but these Christians were extremely objective in getting into the root, or the shoresh, which is Hebrew for root, of that meaning of that passage. So you'll see the entry there that actually juxtaposes this verse with what we find in the Ugaritic text to get you to better understand what is meant here, right? And that's extremely important. The other book is called The Cultural World of the Bible. Okay, this is another excellent reference, right? The Cultural World of the Bible. And these you can get all these from Amazon, or if y'all feel froggy and you want to jump, I have a Patreon, right? It's www.patreon.com/DivineProspect. And when you sign up for this Patreon, I have all of those books on there that you can look at no cost. Okay. So you want to get those books. And there's another book called Ancient Israel by Lester Grabbe. Ancient Israel by Lester Grabbe, Grabbe. And all of these things will help you to exhume what was buried, because this stuff is buried, right? It's deep. And unless you dig and bring it out, you'll only be able to see what's on the surface, and you'll never be able to get what was intended because it's covered over, right? And this is why understanding the culture is important. And that's why my position is learning what is the pre-exilic Israelite culture, because the post-exilic Israelite culture, or Second Temple Judaism, is what has truly influenced Christianity. So Christians who have an understanding of the Old Testament, unless they're doing these ancient pre-exilic Israelite cultural analysis on the Old Testament, their understanding of the text comes from the tradition of the Second Temple. So the Second Temple period is we were at Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel, when they came back to restore the temple, the walls, in the city during the Persian period. And it's during this period of time that the Zadokites that existed, they had a text with them that they then had to put into the temple. And most of the people being 70 years in Babylon did not understand the culture anymore. So they had to relearn everything. Now they're relearning it not in their sovereignty anymore, but they're relearning it while they are under captivity of the Persians in a Persian society. And then you have other groups like Zoroastrianism that is rubbing side to side with Judaism. So you'll see a lot of new developments on the interpretation of certain passages as time goes on from that period of Nehemiah and Ezra, right? So that's why I tell our community, look, we got to go past that to the pre-exilic portion of time before exile and be able to reconstruct and restore that to get the proper meaning, sans or without the flavoring that was added when the Israelites came back from captivity. Does that mean everything in Second Temple Judaism is wrong? No, I'm not saying that. What I'm simply saying is if you want to go back to the root, the shoresh, you have to study pre-exilic Israelite culture, because when Yeshua came on the scene, that is what he was attempting to restore. There was a patriarchal priesthood that was done away with, that the Israelites had not, they had a little bit of knowledge of, that he was trying to restore the understanding of the patriarchs, you know what I'm saying? So that way they can get back on the path of Yah intended, because he felt that the Pharisees and Sadducees of his day polluted things by adding all these additional stipulations to their theocratic culture that they can no longer practice in captivity. Because in order for a theocracy to work, you can't have any other power between you and your deity. Right? When you're in captivity, right? It doesn't work like that. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was the Talmud, right?
Well, the Talmud is the accumulation of the Mishnah and the Gemara, right? So the Mishnah was put down in about 200 CE, but it is accumulation of rulings from the Sanhedrin to establish the oral law. So there were oral laws that was going out, but those oral laws were not codified unless there was a ruling on something. So, for example, if a woman was to, tie her hair a certain way on the Sabbath, and it caused some kind of issue, they will bring it up before the elders, and the elders will bring it before the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin will make a ruling. And it's called what's called halakhic law. That means the law. Halak means to walk. And it means the way you need to walk out certain passages of the text that are not explicit. So you have to find out what is the implied meaning and find a way to apply it during the period of time in which you live. I'll give you an example. The Torah does not tell you how you are to kill a lamb. So you have to figure, okay, how do we kill this lamb so that we can use it for Passover or something else? Well, because you're not given explicit details, you have to find the implied meaning in order to kill that lamb in a way where it will be received by the deity and it can conform to whatever the societal norm is in that society. I'll give you an example of that. If you wanted to get a real lamb for Passover in this day and age in America, there are certain ways that you are taught, told, instructed, or trained on how to kill that animal. Why? Because animals have rights. And there are certain humane ways that you have to kill animals, you know what I'm saying? Legally, you know what I'm saying? Because otherwise you could be reported and you could be charged with a misdemeanor or even a felony, depending upon the situation. So that will affect a person's halakhic practices here in America, because you have a humane society that governs on how certain livestock are to be sacrificed in regards for food or butchered for food. Okay, there's certain rulings from the FDA and the Agricultural Society, etc. So that's why when I go back and I say, okay, look, I understand what this is here on Second Temple Judaism, but when we go to pre-exilic Israelite culture, you're seeing things that if you look at Yeshua, you would be thinking that he is referring to a lot of things that were during his day and time, and some things he did, but certain things he was referring to understandings that would only be known if you had insight back into the culture of the Israelites before exile.
Yeah.
And a lot of that knowledge was lost, but Yeshua, for some reason, was bringing a lot of that stuff out. Yeah. And, this is why I say when you go into the culture, you don't have to spiritualize everything. And that's what Christians do. When they don't understand something, they spiritualize it. I was speaking to a Christian apologist the other day, and I was asking about Zechariah chapter 14, where tabernacle is going to be restored. He said that's spiritual. I said, wow. So I went into, Isaiah, where Isaiah says that the Levites are going to be restored. He says that's spiritual, and it's figurative, and it's not literal. And then we go to Malachi. Malachi also about the law is going to go out in the end times. He says that that's spiritual. That's not literal. But yet, when it comes to tithing, that's literal to a certain degree, right? Because they got to condition it, because it's a little bit different now, because you're not going to give food stuffs to the ecclesiastical staff. They want money, right? So what I'm simply saying is, the more that you take your time to study and the more tools you get, because that's all I like to do is give people the tools and let them fish it for themselves. I can't keep fishing them food, because they may send to eat something that may not give them no substantial value. So what I do is say, look, if you want to catch a fish, catch a fish. They'll use those tools, and they'll realize, well, with my diet, salmon works better, mackerel works better, tuna works better, so I'm going to fish that type of food to eat it for myself, as opposed to what I like that works for my body that may not work for your body. But you have the tools to discover what you need for yourself and exhume the cultural paradigm that was intended by the original author to the audience. And then once you get that understanding, then what you do with that understanding is, okay, how can I take this information and apply it in my contemporary day and time in order to yield a result that is what I intended? Meaning that if you apply something that you read in the text and it doesn't work in real life, what does that mean? People say, well, that means God works in mysterious ways. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that you are misapplying it, because you don't have the original interpretation of what that means, because you have been limited in your study. You have not been given a lens in which to see the text and to tools in which to dissect the text, so that you can get to the way that Yah intends for the audience to know. Because if the culture that you follow in America is Black culture, your spirituality is going to be an admixture of traditional African spiritual systems and customs, and some of the, some traces of that, and it's going to be mingled in with Western Christianity. That's what your culture is going to be. That's not Israelite culture. That's not what the Israelites were doing during that period of time. And if they lived today in America, that's not what they would be doing. So how do we get that information and transmute it into a format that would be true to the text and also applicable within our contemporary environment in which we live? And this is why we push for people to know that, because the more that you get that, the more solid of a foundation it would anchor you into what Yah intends for us to be today.
Okay, so would you so I know that was a lot of information.
Yeah, my bad. I know.
Good thing we're gonna have the replay, right? So everybody could catch it. And so when you say, I think I've heard you say this in one of your discussions or lectures. Understanding the culture and applying the culture can actually help with your spiritual development, right?
Correct. Now, people will say, you crazy. What are you talking about, Divine? They say, well, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. People they say stuff like that to downplay that statement. And I say that because your culture will dictate your spirituality. If I was born in Benin, West Africa, my culture will dictate my spirituality. If I was born in Singapore, the culture there will dictate my spirituality. If I was born in Russia, whatever the culture is will dictate my spirituality, even if the culture has been Christianized. Now watch this. The issue I have is with Christendom. What a lot of Black people who become Israelites or Black extremists tend to realize, they think that Christianity is a native European culture, and it's not. Europeans, like the Visigoths, like the Franks, like the Lombards, what else? We have the Anglo-Saxons, right? These are all groups that lived in Europe before they were proliferated with Christian ideas and concepts. Christianity was foreign to Europe. It didn't start there. It was foreign to Europe. It formulated in the Near East, what we call the ancient Near East. That's where it formulated at. And then once it became a entity, an imperial entity, right, by means of a council being established for unity and for the emperor to adopt Christianity as the state-sponsored religion, which took some time. Constantine did not create Christianity for the Roman Empire. He didn't do that. What he did was he was find a way to coexist with it. And then it wasn't until several emperors later that Christianity actually laid a full-on foothold on the Roman Empire. So you had councils that were developed and created and that occurred in order to establish what orthodoxy was, because now you had the imperial monies to not only establish orthodoxy, but imbue it upon people who are adherents to that religion, right? So anybody that was other than Christianity, once Christianity came on the scene, became an empirical thing, you were considered an atheist. That means you went against the state-sponsored religion. So an Israelite during that period of time, or a Jew during the time when Christianity was an entity or empire, you would be considered an atheist. What? Okay, so yes, because you do not subscribe to the state-sponsored religion. The state-sponsored religion says that Jesus Christ, who is the second person of the Godhead, or the second person in the Trinity, is the God over this religion. And if any way, shape, or form you disagree with that, you'll be called an atheist, one that's without a God, or one that's without the state-sponsored God. And even that word pagan that we hear today means a country dweller. Why? Because urbanization was the thing back then, was a fad back then, right? And with urbanization, it was like the people who areas where you would be influenced by the state-sponsored religion, and that would make you more civilized. And they call the ones outside the skirts of that city or that urban environment the country dwellers or the pagans. Even heathen and pagan have a similar, denotation. And that's how they would write them off. So all the people that lived in Europe that were not part of the Roman Empire were considered heathens, or they were considered pagans or country dwellers, because they did not want to coalesce in the urban areas in which the state-sponsored religion was proliferating at a very fast rate, and its adoption rate was even higher. So again, this is why when we go and uncover words, we look into history, we go into lexicons, we go into cultural Bibles. It helps us to understand, because wherever you're at on the planet is what's going to dictate your spirituality. Growing up black in America, guess what I was? A Christian. My family was a Christian. Why? Because that is black culture in America. Black culture in America is normally led by Christianity. Now, in the past, 50 years or so, like when the Black Power movement started to pop off, we had more interest in more African-centered religions and Kemetic religions and etc. But prior to that, that was not the norm. That's a fad too. That's a novelty as well. So again, your culture dictates your spirituality. If I'm growing up in America, I was born, raised in America, and I'm a black individual engaging in black culture, then that's what I would subscribe to by default of my location and my culture, is that I would be a black Christian. Right. Now, your theological beliefs may vary, but at the end of the day, I would be identified as a Christian. Now, if I find some time to create a community where we're grooming them into Israelite culture, Torah, etc., when the successive generations grow up, it's going to be a different story, because they have a different culture, which is the boundaries that are protecting them from the things on the outside that's there to seek and destroy them. I'll say this one last thing. The important thing to understand what Torah is to know about the family relationship dynamic. Yeah. And I've taught this before, and I'll say it for your audience. This is important, right? In order to understand what it is, you go to Proverbs chapter 1. Bring up Proverbs chapter 1 real quick. Let me lay this out for them, because this helps you to understand what the culture is. And this is something that we can identify here in America as well. So you can bring that real quick. Proverbs chapter 1.
All right. I got the ESV up. That's good?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So we go to verse 8, right? Yeah. Verse 8 says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent." Now, A lot of things we see there. Hear my son. So it's a man talking to his male offspring.
Yeah.
Your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland around your neck and pendants for your neck. So a garland around your head like a crown, and pendants or jewelry or gems around your neck. Because chokmah or wisdom is like finding gems or rubies and gold and diamonds and all precious metals and etc. And it says, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. Well, a sinner is somebody that gets you outside of your father's instructions and outside of your mother's teachings. But it goes even deeper than that. So if we go to Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8, and we read it in the Hebrew, it says, Shema beni musar abika we'al titos torat im mekah. So Shema, something that we can realize, that means hear, right? It can also mean to guard or observe, depending upon the verbal tense and the actual context of the verse. And it says, Beni, my son, musar. And that's what we say is instruction, right? But that's really discipline, chastening, and correction. Look it up. It means chastening, correction, and discipline. So it says, my son, hear my son, the discipline, the correction, the chastening of your father. Watch this. We'al, and not titos, which we go to the root word is natash, which means to forsake or to leave or abandon. Do not. You have the negative privative there. Do not. And it says Torat. Well, what does that go back to? The word Torah. Whoa, wait. So, hear my son, the discipline of your father, or in that tense, Shema does not just mean to hear in that tense. It means to observe. It means to guard. It means to sometimes understand, which we better understand the discipline or the correction of your father, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother. Torah of your mother? What? Let's break this down. So what happens is the man's role that we know in this society that we've established is that the man is there to provide and protect, right? Provide and protect. The mother's role is to be the caretaker of the home and the cultivator of the children until they become of age. And in the case of a young male child, he gets under the tutelage of the father. Right? Watch this. So when that environment is created, the home is the boundaries in which the father protects and provides within the boundaries of that home. The mother's job is to give the instruction on how the child is to thrive within those boundaries. So the discipline, the correction, the chastening of the father is given so that the child can stay within his realm or borders of protection and provision. And the mother is there to teach the child how to navigate within those borders of protection. It's deep. When you go to verse 9, it says, and sinners, do not let them entice you, and do not give in. So the sinner that's there, what says the sinful, are the ones that cause you to deviate away from the navigation within the boundaries of provision and protection of your father. Because if you listen to a person that's telling you, oh, don't listen to your dad, don't listen to your mom, do what we say. Now what happens is you're going to be outside of the borders of protection, provision of the father, and outside of the cultivation of the mother. Therefore, you are on your own.
Yeah.
So this is what Torah is. The Most High has the qualities of both male and female. That's why when he created male, created female, he said when they come together, that's when they become echad, and that's when they best represent the Most High, because he has all those qualities in himself without the gender, because he's neither male nor female. He has no private parts, right?
Yeah.
So he is his traits. He's called Elohe, which will be feminine here. He's called El over here. Sometimes Elohim. It can vary. Elohe means feminine. I'm like, whoa, Why is he called Elohei? What is that? That's the feminine form of El, because of the attributes that is being spoken of or being invoked or being conveyed about him. You know, such as the brooding over the waters in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. That is what a mother hen or a mother bird does over her flock to keep them warm and protected until it's time for them to hatch. Because what happened was, in the beginning, the spirit was cultivating and protecting and warming the material that would then emerge later to become the earth in which we will be brought about.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't mean to preach here. That's not what I'm here to do tonight. I'm just sharing some knowledge, right? To get the people, right? But anyway, this is how you learn culture. When you are able to groom a child in Israelite culture, the things that are autonomously distinct for a community. Autonomy means you have total control of that environment, of those instructions, of those borders, of that cultivation, of that navigation. You have total control over that. And then what happens is you groom the child in that environment. So when a sinner, somebody that is outside of those bounds, entices them, they will not give in, because they understand the sustenance of your survival. You know, when Christianity used to tell us that, oh, you know, the law that says, to hearken unto your mother and your father so that your days may be long in the land. Well, that was one of the promises when the Israelites were keeping the statutes, laws, and commandments, and where children were listening to their parents, is that they will have an extension of life in the land because the decisions that they make, that they're trained up to have. They're not forced to go in a direction. They're given the tools and they're given the instructions so that when they venture out of the borders of provision and protection, the male child can establish that for the next family, and the woman knows how to operate under the guises of the man that she marries, his protection, his provision, so that she can then also rip the next generation. It's learning what those roles are. Once you step outside of that and you're enticed by the world that tells you don't need that type of environment, you need to do this and you need to do that, you will not give in, because you understand the power in being culturally autonomous. Because that is the only way that you can fully please or satisfy the deity that has covenant with your ancestors.
Gotcha. So there's something you said earlier that I want to get to, but we have somebody in the audience real quick that had a question. Star, it says, what verse is the feminine L that you were saying? And just they want the verse.
Okay, so I'll give you a good verse, right? That has all three of them in there. Go to Genesis 33 and 18. You can bring that up on your site. Genesis 33 and 18. And shout out to Kokab Tafari. I know exactly who that brother is.
Yeah,
so Kokab means star in Hebrew, right? This is for people that's wondering what that means, but it means star in Hebrew.
That's actually one of my brothers down this way too.
Oh, word? Yeah, that's a good people's right there. All right. So let me know when you bring it up.
All right. Genesis 33. What was the verse?
Yeah, you can start at verse 18 to 20. Okay. And I'll read it, right? And we're going to hone in on verse 20. So 18 says, and Yaakov came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he brought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohei Israel. So when we hold into verse 20, you'll see that you have the word Elohei there. Okay? So Elohei, if you go back to your lexicon, will show you that the word's origin is Eloah, and that is that can be considered a feminine form of El. Eloah, Elohei, which would be your feminine form, or it could be the plural form of Eloah, which can also be considered a feminine form of El. Now, when you go into your lexicons, you'll see what certain lexicons will tell you that knowing the Semitic languages and looking at how these words are parsed, this is why we look at the morphology of words and its context, cognates, and other languages, we'll see that when you have that suffix hey on there, that can denote that something is actually feminine. The difficulty with a translator is looking at Eloah or Elohe, which is the plural form of Eloah, and saying, whoa, we can't say this is the feminine form, because again, in their mind, God is a man, God is a male. Well, the God that we're talking about has no gender. So he can be Eloah, or he could be El, or he could be Elohim, which is plural, masculine plural, or Elohe, which is feminine plural. He can be these things because his attributes, he has the things that he's put separately in male and in female, so that when they come together, they are echad, or they are one, and they reflect the godhood. This is what they reflect when they're together. So hopefully that helps to give you some insight. There's other instances as well where we have Elohe and Eloah in other places in the text, where also we look at attributes, which is important. So that's why I'm just trying to give the imagery when I said the brooding over with the Ruach or the spirit, because Ruach also, that's not feminine. I mean masculine, that's feminine. Ruach is feminine in Hebrew. You can look it up. It's in the furtive tense. It's in Hebrew. It's feminine. So understanding these things, you know that he has masculine and feminine traits or attributes. He does not have the gender element, but he does have the attributes of those various genders.
Gotcha. All right. So we're going to rewind like about 50 million statements right quick.
Oh, no. Okay. I'm going to slow down. No problem. I'm going to slow down.
One thing you said about the new generation knowing Torah to be able to build a community with the culture. My question is, because I said something like this, and I was actually attacked saying that we can't do it.
Correct.
So you believe that we can actually utilize Torah right now and still apply the culture and build our own community within the land that we're in right now?
We can, but there are some stipulations. Okay. So you have to learn how to work around the obstacles that will prevent you from doing it wholeheartedly. So there's some things we just can't do because there's no temple, right? There's no priest. And even if we did make a sacrifice, which you still can, there's certain sacrifices you can make without the priest. Very few. But even if we do those, there are other follow-up things that we're supposed to do as well. So a lot of things we are rehearsing. A lot of things are just cultural mandates that we follow from that theocracy, okay? We can only fully keep Torah in a theocracy, and that won't happen again until Yah establishes, New Jerusalem for his people, right? Until then, there are things that we do that will have other people identify us as being Kodesh or set apart. Now, that's important. So when we win the fringes, right, when we keep the Sabbath, when we congregate for our feast days, these are all things that come out of our culture, the way we do dealing. So when I work with brothers, right, that do a project for me, I pay them, because Torah says that after a man has worked, he is to be paid after his work is completed.
Yeah.
Right? You don't wait 2 weeks. You don't wait a month or so forth. The text also says that if you give a loan to your brother, do not charge interest. These are principles that can still be done today. The text also says that if you have a field and you are picking food and any food falls along the sides, that is for the poor, the widow, and the oppressed and the fatherless. You can still do that today as well as the principle. These are still principles that come from a theocratic society in Iron Age Israel that our ancestors had, that we can still pull elements of it and still establish it today. Now, when it comes to the element of Yeshua, Yeshua came on the scene to fulfill the covenant, because the covenant has an end result because of a king. So the king and then the fall of man. You got to look at both of those, because that's what he came to do. He came to give you the spiritual release and came to give you the physical release.
Yeah.
The physical come by way of the king. The spiritual come by way of the lineage of Adam and the fall of man, what we call the fall of man. So these things are important, because even in the Qumran community that dwelt in the Qumran caves by the border of Jordan, by the Dead Sea, right? That community, they were not messianics in a sense where they subscribe to Yeshua. But if you compare or codify their practices and what we find in the New Testament, they're like one-to-one mapping. Well, why is that? Because they come into the same conclusions, because there are things that they're examining from the Tanakh that lines them up on how things are to be carried out. Like they even believe that there should be a spiritual redemption of Israel and a physical redemption of Israel. Well, read the New Testament, it's the same thing, right? You got, Yeshua talking about both, and then the disciples talking about the spiritual redemption, and then you have where Revelation gives you the physical redemption of Israel. You see all these things, all these elements, right? So Torah can be practiced in our land, but only based on what can be done. What can't be done is not that we have an unwillingness to do it. It's not because we're trying to use that to add to our righteousness. It's not we're trying to use that to wipe away Yeshua and what he taught us to leave, but it's simply because there are some things that we are unable to do because we're no longer in a theocracy, but the remnant of things that we can do, because you can, and I send these documents all the time when I teach my students. I go over each and every one of the statute laws and commandments with them, and then what we do is that we highlight the things that you need a priest for, the things that you need a temple for, the things that you can do without a priest or without a temple.
Yeah.
And no matter where you're at. And those are the things that we keep. Those are the things that we do, because when people see our observance of that, it sets us apart from the rest of the secular realm.
Correct. And so within the culture, because what you said earlier about over spiritualizing things, that's something I actually been talking about recently as well. Because within the culture, you can still have businesses, work on finances, help, some of the stuff that you do now, and that can still be incorporated within the culture, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So
in your business dealings, right?
Yeah.
If you have land, which I encourage everybody, if you have a backyard or a front yard, or if you don't even have those, you have a sunroom, or if you just have a windowsill, you should plant something, whether it's herbs, right? Whether it's vegetables, right? If you have a backyard, plant some fruit trees. You should plant these things, because what they do is that they get you back in harmony with the nature that Psalm 19:1. Go to Psalm 19:1 real quick. Because the problem is we've been so clouded by technology, by light pollution, by modern conveniences, that we are detached from the nature that was here in order for us to marvel after Yah. And when you do little things like building a little garden in your backyard, or do things such as moon gaze and star gaze, Abraham looked at the stars, and Most High says, you see all these stars in the heaven, if you count these stars, these are stars, that's going to be similar to your offspring. It's going to be immeasurable, unnumerable. You know what I'm saying? And then you look at the Most High speaking to Job and said to Job, can you pull, Orion out of its season, or Mazzaroth, which is the constellations, out of their season? And so he's talking about the star constellation. You're looking at the star constellation. They use the moon as an indicator to let them know when the new month is ushered in. These are things that they do that we don't do anymore. I ask most black people not outside looking at the moon to see the moon phases day to day, week to week. Yeah. Most black people ain't got no garden growing in their backyard. You know what I'm saying? Like,
that was a part of the great culture, right?
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts. And these are things that you can still do today and still apply the principles, such as if you have a garden and you are picking up foods and some are left behind, the remnant that's left behind, donate it to the homeless. You can't go wrong with that principle. Because not only are you getting the bulk of it to feed you and your family or whatever your other needs, but it's also helping to take care of those that's in need. If a brother asks you for $100 and you like, oh, I can make a profit off of him, let me charge him $100 and then $20, that's going to make it even more difficult for that brother to pay you back, because he was in dire straits when he asked you for it.
Yeah.
So if you remove that interest element, then what it's showing is that you're not making a business out of your brother. This is truly an act of philanthropy that is pure and undiluted.
Yeah.
See, these principles rewire you back to Yah's intention for his people that can still be done today. When you forsake the law, the text tells you, if you forsake the law, guess what? Yah's not going to hear you. That's what the text said. I ask Christians that all the time. I say, well, what does that mean? It's a conundrum for some of them. And I'm saying, well, you can still keep elements of Torah and still subscribe to Yeshua. Because historically, you had groups that did that. But those groups that kept the law and subscribed to Yeshua They were persecuted by the Christians and the Jews. That middle group were persecuted by the Christians to the point where in the 4th century they were vanished. They were gone. There was no more of them. Either they were persecuted out, excommunicated, or absorbed into the two polar opposite groups, which would be Judaism and Christianity.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you said which? Oh, you said verse 1, right?
Correct.
All right. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork.
Keep going.
Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard.
Keep going.
Their voice goes through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world.
Slow down. So until you're able to marvel after his handiwork, which is nature, the terrestrial realm and the celestial realm, you will not be able to appreciate the magnitude of Yah's love for you. Because he has to sustain everything by his word, by his power, by his authority. And the fact that he looks at man, which is a little lower than angels. And because man has been given a covenant by Yah to Zekar, which means to remember. That's what male means in Hebrew. Go back and look it up. The remembrance of the establishment of why I put you here is to have dominion over my handiwork, that he takes time out to deal with that man who could be an insignificant speck of dust, that he takes time to deal with that person and hear that person and respond to that person, interact with that person and then do certain things that move and shake things up in their world and shift things. And it goes to show you the magnitude of his love. Because if you look at you as a speck of dust in regards to the rest of nature, in regards to the rest of the universe, the fact that this deity decides he wants to deal with you personally goes to show you that this is a love that you've never been loved like before. It puts you in that humble state. It puts you in that state of reverence, because worship back then was prostrating before the deity, where you are surrendering your all before him. Not standing up and saying, Jesus, please, please. Prostrating before him. Surrendering yourself before him. Because in his presence, you are not worthy. Isaiah discovered this in Isaiah chapter 6. He realized that I'm a man of unclean lips when he got a vision and saw a throne room. He shouldn't have been there. But when you're in Yah's presence, you have no choice but to surrender. When he says, who will do this for me? Who will go? You will understand that the love that he's given you already, you are already in debt to him. That's all I want to say.
Well, Divine ready to preach.
Nah, I'm trying not to. I'm trying to hold back.
Ready to give a whole lesson. Nah, it's good though. I mean, I see a couple people in here who are like I said, working their way into Torah, and they say that they're really understanding a lot of things, which was the goal of the whole discussion. So, and like I say, and I know you know this, is the scriptures was a Eastern mindset.
Correct.
Right. And so when I'm telling people, when we read this thing, we have to think Eastern. We can't think the way we were brought up, right? Because like you said, with the idioms and different things like that, that we have to learn, that we have to understand. And it's by understanding the Hebraic culture, you can even understand the New Testament.
Even better. Even more than what you thought you did know. Like one misconception by Christians, which is crazy, because all you got to do is read the Bible, like the Old Testament. You know what I'm saying? Is that they think that every sin required a sacrifice, and that's not true.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So if a husband and wife comes together and there's a degree of intimacy and there's some emission of seminal fluids that go out, you are considered unclean, right? For a whole day. You have to go wash, and from evening to evening, you're unclean, right? Yeah. Guess what? If you did that act, you're pretty much breaking the law. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Unless you go and wash. But is that punishable? Is that a capital offense? No, it's not. So it doesn't require capital punishment. Yeah. You understand?
Yeah.
So
that's something you would learn in Leviticus. So we have another question here. Do you see any connection at all to grounding in Moses being told to take off his shoes off?
Say that one more time.
It's in the comment here. It says, do you see any connections at all?
Oh, I see what he's saying.
Yeah.
So grounding, two things. So grounding is a practice that people perform so that way their body can be in tune with nature. So they'll go outside in their backyard, front yard, and just walk with their bare feet each and every day that they wake up. Because the earth has an electromagnetic pulse, and then we can also tune into that frequency as well the closer we are to nature. Right. Yeah. So what he's pretty much saying is when Moses had his sandals on, it prevented that connection, right? That divine connection that was coming from the earth or permeating through the earth, that once he came to a certain point, his sandals would prevent him from getting the full urge of what was being conveyed, the energy that was being conveyed as the deity spoke to him. So when you take off your sandals, your shoes, and you touch the ground in nature, it grounds you back to your original state where we did not have those soles of rubber that's preventing that energy from transmitting from the earth to our bodies. You know what I'm saying? So yes, there is some connection, and some people have created customs based off of that. But I think there's a theological element, and then there's a cultural element in regards to taking off your shoes, because you didn't want anything that would hinder you from experience everything the deity has. And this is an ancient Near Eastern practice. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, got you. We have another question here. I'm
gonna take one more, and then I'm gonna go.
Got you.
Yeah.
It says, with Yeshua being the heavenly high priest, do you feel that the aspect of Torah where the priest and temple are needed, you can perform because he is our high priest?
So he takes care of all that work. We read that in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, where he is working in the heavenly sanctuary as the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. He gave a sacrifice once and for all, and then he goes in there to do his heavenly work. So the things that we would typically need a priest for, he will cover that. If you're inducted into the Melchizedek order, he will cover that. And in him covering that will exempt you from the things that you would need a priest for. Right? If that makes any sense.
Got you. Well, definitely appreciate you coming on, man. Like I said, this was a powerful discussion. Honestly, I think it may need to be a part 2. I know there's so much more.
It's up to you. I'm just honored to be here. Thank you for having me. I just want to tell the family, you can follow my YouTube channel, which is Kingdom Harbinger Ministries. If you need to reach out to us, if you need any help for anything, it's Kingdom Harbinger, HARBINGER @gmail.com. You can look me up as Divine Prospect on Facebook. Also, my Patreon is www.patreon.com/DivineProspect. That's where we put a lot of exclusive stuff on there as well that you won't find on my YouTube channel, which is Kingdom Harbinger Ministries. And just to let the family know that I will be in Dallas on July 17th. From the 17th to the 19th, we're doing a street outreach on the 17th. On the 18th, we're doing a KHM Dallas chapter launch. So it's an event. It's a free event. We're going to have appetizers and, stuff to drink there as you come and see what the organization is about if you're interested in joining us. And then on that Sunday, we're doing a credit repair and naturopathic health education seminar. All right, which is going to be in the 18th before I leave out. So we're going to be doing something each one of those days if you can make it out. So this is in Dallas, Texas, July 17th to the 19th. I will have all the flyers out soon because we're in the process of putting it together. And when I put the flyers out, then you guys will get all the details onto where it's at so you can show up. And we will be there in Dallas soon, And I just wanted to say shout out to my brother Jahmar. This is a good dude from the time I met him to now. He's consistent. He is serious about this walk. He has helped a lot of people. He has some good people already on this short show that he's had. And he's linked up with a good congregation, which is Boom. So shout out to my elder Moray over there at Boom and all the other elders. You know what I'm saying? Matter of fact, Derek, he created this necklace right here that people ask me about all the time. Now, you can't have this one specifically, you know what I'm saying? But shout out to Derek Seiler, who puts my neck pieces together and does an excellent job. And, shout out to Boom, man, because, those are some really solid people over there, man. All the elders and the Chief Moray and everybody else that I've met over there, solid people. So he's in good hands, man. And this brother right here is leading the charge in South Florida, man. Yeah. So, I'm going to keep you prayed up, man, because that's not an easy task, man. It's going to be a brand new thing for you, but wait till you're 5 years in. You're going to face a lot of battles, but each one is a lesson to unlock a blessing, so it's worth it.
Yeah, amen. I'm seeing it week by week. So, uh, but like I said, I appreciate it. We gonna set it up. We gonna set up part two. I have a few more shows lined up, but we gonna set it up real soon. Because
Sure.
there's a few things I want to get into. So I'll reach out to you, and I will set it up.
All right, King. I appreciate that,
All right.
Jahmar, man. You have a blessed evening, my brother. Shout out to everybody in the audience. Thank you for supporting his platform. Make sure you guys follow him. If you're on YouTube, make you subscribe. And you're going to see a lot of great content that he has coming soon. So,
All right. Appreciate it, man. You have a
anytime,
good night,
King.
man. All right.
All right,
Shalom.
shalom.